welcome to another of our conversations about COVID. And today I have the great privilege of having Dr. Rhame with us. He is not new. I've had multiple conversations with him. He is an infectious physician, and I'll let him introduce a very short introduction. Thank you so much, Dr. Rhame, for joining us. If you want to just give us one sentence about what you do, and then, yeah, we'll jump straight into questions, Doc.
So I'm an infectious diseases physician, and I take care of patients with infectious diseases, and that includes COVID. And for the last 3 months or so, I've been much involved in the COVID vaccine trial of Janssen & Janssen. And I follow the variant situation fairly closely because I think a lot of the future of COVID is going to depend on the impact of these variants.
Yeah. So thank you, Doc. I think that's exactly what we want to start touching based on, like, lots of questions that we have got around is we are hearing a lot about this COVID vaccine new variants. How is it different? Can you can touch a little bit on that, Doc?
Well, first, let me just talk about the grandeur of evolution. Evolution is our opponent here, and evolution is a pretty formidable opponent. And you can always expect anything to evolve to elude anything that is against it. And it's not surprising that this virus would evolve. It is seeming to evolve a little bit more radically and a little bit more rapidly than I would have thought. I think this is coming from 2 sources. Number one, there are a lot of infections around, and the more infections that are around, the more opportunities you give the virus to look into the mutations that help it. And the other thing is a relatively new vaccine, relatively new virus, and that may give it more room to improve because it didn't have a chance like our other opponents in the viral world. They've been working on us for a long time, and they've gained many of the improvements that it might. There was just probably a little more room for this one to improve because it's new. So that having been said, what's easier to do is to say what these variants might do than it is to say whether or not each of these things is actually happening. So let's just talk about increase in infectiousness. That's the most obvious one. I think that's the best established, particularly the United Kingdom variant. But anytime you see a new one taking over their scene that fast, it clearly is more infectious. I mean, there's just no way around that. We've actually had a previous variant as well that took over in the United States, and we couldn't actually pin down exactly that it was more infectious, but the very fact that it took over so rapidly is pretty good establishment of that. So clearly, many of them, just by the fact that they are taking over, are more infectious. Now, there's been some science behind that people have adduced. The variants that seem to be taking over have at least some of their mutations in the receptor binding portion of the spike protein. Now that's a mouthful, but we know that all over this virus there are these spike proteins, these long things look like clubs. I'm just going to have to tell this person I can't talk now. Yeah. So Adrian, I'm taping with Vino, so I can't talk right now. Okay. Bye. Sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah.
So you've got this protein that's all over the virus, and that's the protein that the virus uses to get into the cells of ours that it's trying to infect. And there's only the tip of that protein that combines with the receptor on our cell that's trying to infect, and that seems to be the place that all of these variants at least have some mutation in those spots. So there's some science behind this. The UK and the South African variants actually have a number of other mutations, And they seem that they're mostly in other portions of that spike protein, but they seem to assist it as well in getting into cells. So that's number one, increased infectiousness. Number two that it might do is make the disease more or even less severe. Uh, and there's conflicting information on that. In the UK, they do think it's a little more severe. The other ones, there isn't as much information on that, but that's of course a worry. If it's more severe, it can be worse for us. The next thing it might do is to escape the testing we do for it. So if you may know that this PCR test that we do detects little fragments of the viral genes, and most of the PCR tests are redundant. They check in several different places on the virus. So for instance, one of the most prominently used PCR tests for a little nucleic acid, a little genetic segment that codes for the protein that codes the spike, and another protein that does in the nucleus, and another that is involved in the replication apparatus of the virus. So the PCR fragment that codes for the spike protein is not detected by this test. So that fortunately we get the information that the person has COVID because the other parts of the genetic gene of the virus are being detected. So you could lose detectability if you get enough variation. Fortunately, most of our PCR tests are redundant in that they check for several different spots on the virus. Now, the one that's most important in the vaccine thing is that it might allow the virus to infect people who have been vaccinated, because the vaccine produces a set of antibodies, and if the virus mutates in the places where those antibodies interact, the virus might elude the protection the vaccine offers. And it does look like that was the case for the South African variant for the novavirus vaccine. Now, that was just published yesterday. The novavirus vaccine study in South Africa was a small 44,000 people, and but it did look like there was not as much protection. It dropped to 50%. It was 60% of the HIV negatives, but it dropped to 50% in the people who had this strain. So that's going to be a disappointment. This is the first clinical information we have on this issue of eluding the immunity produced by these vaccines. Most of the previous information is test tube information, where you take sera from people who've been vaccinated and you mix it up with these various different strains, and you see how well that sera, the antibody portion of their blood specimen, neutralizes the virus. And it's a higher order of information to actually have cases where you can see that the case rate was not diminished as much as it would have been for the standard strains. Now that's disturbing, because it really is the case that these vaccines, even though they produce spike protein by very different methods, they all produce about the same spike. The spike is not exactly the natural spike. They change the spike in a couple of ways to hold it in a certain configuration, but virtually all these vaccines have the same modifications of the spike protein. So that would be, again, indirect, not conclusive, but it's certainly a cause for anxiety that the same impact will be seen for the South African variant. Fortunately, that does not seem to be the case with the UK variant. And that's the one we have quite a bit of in the United States. We have only a couple, we've had only actually 2 recognized cases of the South African variant in South Carolina, unless recently. But they'll get around. These viruses are very clever, and we certainly can expect to see anything take over that gives the virus an advantage. That's the way evolution works. It's toughy.
Thank you, Dr. Ram. Katie, you had another question.
You referenced the scientific hard data coming out now, and with Johnson and Johnson's just becoming available, can you help us understand again why more efficacy in different parts of the world and what we need to know about all the vaccines?
So the J&J vaccine preliminary information is only available in a press release at this moment. That's the trial we did, and we put a lot of work into it. I was hoping for a better efficacy rate than 60%. On the other hand, that's, I think, going to be good enough for the FDA to issue the emergency use authorization. We don't know that yet. But before Moderna and Pfizer came in at 95%, the consensus view was that any vaccine with efficacy of 50% or greater was worth distributing. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine actually came out better protection against severe illness than overall illness. And that's a good thing, because it's the severe illness that really that we really want to avoid. As I've gotten my vaccine now, my Moderna vaccine, I was ineligible for the J&J vaccine because I was the principal investigator of the study, but I got my Moderna, and I think that means I'm not going to die. At my age, I was looking at a significant chance of dying, but those vaccines, and it does look like the J&J vaccine as well, do a better job against protecting against severe illness. So I might get it, but I don't think I'm going to die. And I think people are going to probably want to take the J&J vaccine if the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine is not really going to be very soon available to them.
Mhm.
And then they'll have the decision about whether they want to take the Moderna or Pfizer on top of the J&J vaccine. We have a little bit of information about that because people in our trial, when they get eligible to those vaccines, are eligible to be unblinded. That is to say, to find out whether they got the vaccine or the placebo. And we've unblinded 29 people, for instance. So that's over, that's like 13% of our total enrollment. And I'm presuming that'll be the case across their entire population. Most of the people who got randomized to vaccine decided to go ahead and take Pfizer or Moderna anyway. So we are going to have a little safety information about the impact of taking Moderna after Pfizer. I'm sorry, taking Moderna or Pfizer after Janssen and Janssen. It's getting very hard to keep all these straight. So that's rank speculation. Who knows what the FDA is going to do? The data need to be compiled in a very extensive way. Those of you who follow this closely know that when Moderna and Pfizer filed their applications for emergency use authorization, these are 100-page documents that are densely packed with data. And now all that data has to be compiled and submitted to the FDA. And then the advisory board has to look at it. And then the FDA has to make its decision. Typically, they follow the advice of the advisory board, but they don't have to. And then the vaccine has to get into distribution. So that's a month away, probably. And what is that, if the sequence that I predicted is going to happen or not, is totally unknown.
I understand that there's a 2-dose J&J study also happening. Is that something that's possibility on the forefront as opposed to only one?
They have that. They have a double dose versus placebo vaccine trial underway. It's called Ensemble 2. Ours was called Ensemble. I don't know how well it's going to enroll. That's a problem. It's being done in outside the U.S. And I think it'll enroll better there. Here, I think it's going to be tough to enroll because Moderna and Pfizer are not too distant for many people. So Janssen did a good job, I think, with Ensemble. That is to say, permitting people to unblind themselves at the point they could get they could get Pfizer or Moderna, and I think that's a good solution. And it wasn't clear what they were going to do with Ensemble 2 in that regard, because they could be unblinding people, 2 weeks after they enrolled, and that's I'm not sure they're going to permit that, but I couldn't figure that one out.
Thank you so much, Doc. I appreciate all your insight and your time. So, just to wrap up with time, I had one final question. With all of these vaccines, with things coming up in the future, number one, what would be still precautions that we want to tell the community that they should continue having? And where do you see 2021 as far as the COVID-19 infection?
So, let me try to establish a little credibility here. I've been on the pessimistic side of things for really all the way back to February last year, and to the extent that people were aghast when I predicted that this was going to change the way we live substantially, and that certainly has turned out to be the case. I'm a little optimistic now. I think these vaccines, even if they're not perfect, they're going to take enough of a bite out of this illness that we're going to see a decline in community acquisition rates. That's the thing you have to watch. All the stuff I'm talking about the impact of these strains on vaccine use or transmissibility and so forth, they're all important. But the thing that really matters is how much community transmission we're having. And I think we're going to see that substantially go down. It's not going to go down as fast or as much as I would hope, and certainly until we see some threshold that's quite a bit lower, I think, than we're going to get to soon. You need to be people who even have been vaccinated or have had COVID need to continue their precautions. And I just said, I'm happy. I don't think I'm going to die. But I'm not going to relax my precautions at all, because I don't want to get sick, period. And I don't want to increase the transmission of this. And so there's a community benefit. There's a benefit to the community as a whole by not getting infected. It's not just a benefit to you, it's a community benefit. So don't relax your precautions. That's the bottom line.
Thank you so much, Doc, for your time. We really appreciate you taking the time and answering these questions. I hope this episode was helpful for everyone. Wishing you all the best. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave it down. Have a great one.